welcome you guys. Thanks for coming out tonight. As most of you know, I'm Halley Cotton. So I teach English and composition at UAB. So I deal some with literature and then I deal some with introductory writings to for our freshman students. On top of that, I am also the managing editor of the Birmingham Poetry Review and the poetry editor for Nell, which also used to be Poem Memoir Story. So both of those publications have been around for going on 30 years now. I have been involved with them for the past 10. So I started out as a slush pile reader. So that's the slush pile is where all of the submissions go, and you sit there and you kind of decide yes, no, you are the first line for people and their publications, and you kind of winnow them down, and then together as an editorial team you decide what gets published from there. That kind of goes on to the higher up editors. So I have sort of worked my way up the line, and I actually publish both publications now. So I take them, I put them into their formatting and everything. I make sure that everything looks pristine, and I send it off to the printers. So my role at these literary journals is kind of transforming. So I've been like bottom level, and now I'm working an entirely different end of things. So as someone who has been in publishing and has published a bunch of writers and also had my own works published, I wanted to kind of talk to you guys about that journey in and of itself. So with your writings, you've got them all written down, polished up, and you want to get them published somewhere, but how, where, why, like what's all the sort of hangups, and what can you expect out of the publishing industry, right? So a lot of what we have as creative writers is literary journals. Those are there's so many of them. Typically, universities house at least one literary journal. So UAB has two, four that are nationally recognized, and then we have Aura, which is our student-led literary journal as well. So, and that is great and wonderful, and we love it. So we actually have at least three. And the Ada Creative Writing Workshop does put out a literary journal every summer by their students for their students. So that's awesome. Birmingham has the Birmingham Arts Journal, and each one of the surrounding colleges, junior colleges, also has their own literary journals as well. So they are a very sort of easy thing to produce. The main thing to keep in mind is that every journal is going to have its own sort of personality. So you sort of need to find where your writing is going to fit in on the spectrum of literary journals, because will your eco poetry work so very well at sort of a social justice sort of journal? Maybe, but maybe there's another place for your eco poetry to go that would be kind of find its own sort of little niche. So the only way that you can kind of dig your teeth into this is to look around and see what's available. What I like to do when I am trying to find a home for my work is I look at who my influences are. I look at who do I enjoy reading, and then I flip to the back of their work. So if it's a novel, I go look at the acknowledgments page. If it is going to be a poetry collection, I flip to, again, the acknowledgments where it lists poems published in this collection have been previously published by. And guess what? They're going to list probably 20, 30 journals that they have had their works in. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a feel for who you could potentially send to. And you're going to see a lot of repetition of names, right? So places like Poetry, Copper Canyon, Northwest Review, Birmingham Poetry Journal is a big one as well. So if you write in a certain vein, you're going to see these certain journal names pop up again and again and again. There's the question of, do you want to go for an online journal, or do you want to go for a journal in print? So journals in print tend to not publish as frequently. So for instance, the Birmingham Poetry Review is going to be a yearly publication, which means we only have a certain amount of room. We have to be pretty choosy about who we put where, because we can't publish all the people who send to us. We publish about 10% of the people who submit, and that's being generous. Um, for an online journal, you have a lot more space available to you. So you can publish things on a daily, on a weekly basis, build up sort of your email base, and have a wider distribution method, right? So you also have to think about longevity of the work, right? So how is something in print going to last, going to be passed around? Will people be able to revisit it later? Or is it one of those, once it's been published and put out into the world, people just kind of have to stumble across it when and where they may, right? It's going to be in a small used bookshop where someone wanders the aisles and sort of picks it up and thumbs through it and says, oh, hey, what the heck? You know, it's 50 cents, it's $1, I'm going to get it. Or you find it in like a little free library or something like that. But it's nice to have something in your hands that has your work in it, right? However, online journals, they're going to catalog their things, but there is the instance where online journals do go under. Regular publications go under as well, and they lose their hosting, they lose their space. So there is the chance that you have something published and it just disappears, right? So you have that publishing credit to your name and everything, but you don't have anything to show for it maybe on the back end. It's kind of a risk that you take when you've got these newer online journals that nobody's really ever heard of, right? So they start up, they're looking for content, you kind of send to them, you're kind of first on the list, and since they don't have a lot of people to choose from, there is the great possibility that you may be chosen and published, which is really exciting and it's a thrill, right? But also, if it's not a journal that people know about, how many people are reading your work, right? And if the journal goes under, you've got to talk about, well, who has the publications? Did the publication rights revert back to you? What was in your publishing agreement? Did they maintain the publishing rights? And what happens if that journal does happen to go under? This is why you kind of have to be careful about deciding and choosing what place you want to submit to and who gets the pleasure of keeping your work, right? So it is pretty much industry standard that once you publish, rights revert back to you, but it can vary to the point where you have to check your publishing agreement when you are signing something to make sure that you are not signing away your work permanently for good, right? Some journals pay. Not all of them do. Most journals, print journals, will pay you in contributors' copies, right? So if you send to Nell and Nell happens to publish your work, you get 2 contributors' copies. If you submit to Birmingham Poetry Review and you get your work picked up, you get 1 contributor copy, right? Meanwhile, you've got other places that will actually pay you for your work, right? And those places are going to be a little bit harder to get into. A lot of the university presses don't pay you because they don't have so very much money to go around. So you really have to consider, like, what's important for you. Are you in it for the money? Are you in it for the readership? Are you in it just to get the byline? And so that's a lot to think about. And then you start getting into, well, I'm a little overwhelmed because there are entirely too many choices to think about, right? And then when you start narrowing down the list, you find out about reading periods. Not all journals are open for reading periods for you to send their work to all of the time. So for Nell, our reading period typically opens in January and closes in September, right? So that's going to give us part of the academic year and over the summer to read, and then we spend sort of the winter months putting together a publication to get it out. For BPR, we only read during the academic year, so that gives us summer to kind of put everything together and then get our issue out. Other journals, sometimes they only open up for 1 week a month. Sometimes they only open up for 3 days out of the year because they get all sorts of submissions just kind of piled on top of them. And those are the really hard journals to get into. And so you have to consider, like, who is open and when do they open? So I'm going to drop for you in the chat a really good resource for you guys to have as you are starting to get into the world of literary journals. So this is Poets and Writers. And it is Poets and Writers magazine, but they do have online resources that are entirely free. It's pw.org. Your link's there in the chat. you can use this resource to help you find who is open for submissions right now. What genre are you trying to submit in? Is it flash fiction, nonfiction essay? Are you trying to publish fiction? Um, are you trying to publish poems? Right. So you can kind of narrow down who takes what. You can easily see if the journal is paying or if they're not paying, if they're online format or not. And then it kind of gives you the link to the journal you can go through and you can kind of look and see, hey, what is their feel, their vibe? What's their readership like? Um, with that, when you submit to a publication, you're going to do that usually one of two ways. Usually you will submit it digitally via an online platform like Submittable, right? To submit via Submittable, there's usually between a $3 to $5 reading fee, right? So you are kind of throwing your submission into the pot, kind of like a lottery, to see if you will potentially win. The reading fee covers use of the platform in and of itself. It covers the cost of printing. It covers the cost of producing a publication. So many of your literary journal editors are not getting paid. I do not get paid to read the slush pile. I do not get paid to be an editor. I do get paid to actually put together and publish the journals, but that has only been something over this last year. So most of our literary journals are entirely volunteer work. So I know that the $3 to $5 fee kind of seems steep and extravagant, but there's a lot of cost involved in producing a literary journal. And the reason for the $3 fee is that it's supposed to mimic what you would have spent if you happened to print off your submission and send it in paper, which is how we used to do things. And it's still how a lot of journals still want things done. So if you were to submit to the Birmingham Poetry Review, it would be on paper. We don't take digital submission, which means you print out your 5 sheets of paper, you have to put them in the envelope with your postage, and then you have to put a self-addressed stamped envelope in there as well. So another envelope that's got your return address on it, and it's got another stamp on it as well. Okay, so if you were to consider the cost of all of that, it would run roughly $3 for you. So what we're trying to do there is we're trying to make it kind of easier for you to make sure that your work gets out there while also offsetting the cost of producing the journal. If you are submitting to a journal, I beg of you to please read their submission guidelines, okay? For instance, if you were to submit to the Birmingham Poetry Review, it specifically states do not include a cover letter. Some journals like a cover letter. The cover letter is going to basically briefly introduce you, let you know the titles of the work that you're sending so that people don't lose track of them, and just gives kind of like a nice friendly hello to the editors, right? Some journals don't want that. They don't want to hear what other publications you've been published in. They don't want to hear your bio straight off the bat. They want to keep the reading kind of like a cold reading, where they don't know who you are. They only want to read the quality of the work and then determine off of that. Sometimes the cover letter can slant people towards, oh, well, they've been published in such and such and such. Those are really great journals. I bet their poems are really awesome. And so like already you've got kind of like this beneficial feeling for this writer without ever having read their work, and that can kind of influence some editors. We like to try and say and think that it doesn't, but in many cases it does. Each editor is different, right? And you have an entire team of editors who are helping to make these sorts of decisions. The thing to keep in mind is if you are sending in a paper submission, you have to have that self-addressed stamped envelope, because you may not get your reply back, right? The whole reason for the envelope is to see whether you get a rejection or just see whether you get an acceptance. If you don't do that, you may very well just never get a reply. And what have you done? You have sent off your work for it to just sit and you never hear from it again, which has happened, right? And we want to prevent that from happening. So make sure that you're reading the guidelines for each journal that you're submitting to. If I have to write a cover letter, I don't really tailor the cover letter to each submission, to each journal that I'm submitting to. I typically will go and find the editor's name that I'm submitting to for the particular journal and put that in there. Dear Editors also works. Some people might find that a little cold and stoic. I don't, if it comes to me, if it says Dear Editors. If I do see my name, then I'm like, hey, someone did their research. If I see another name that's not mine, I'm like, you forgot to resave the cover letter from the last time you were submitting. Okay. So just know that that's the thing. So we start with the Dear line, Dear Editors, or Dear specific editor. Then you're going to get into it with I am submitting and list the titles of your work for consideration. Say for consideration. Let them know if it is a simultaneous submission, right? So most journals, not all journals, but most journals accept simultaneous submissions, which means you can take the same poems and give it to one journal and at the same time give those same poems or story or whatever to a different journal for consideration. Now, the catch there is that you have to remember what you sent where. And if you get an acceptance from one journal, you have to immediately go and withdraw that particular title from those other journals. You can do a partial withdrawal and just withdraw the poems or the story that has been accepted elsewhere, or you can do a full withdrawal. You don't have to do a full withdrawal if, let's say, only one poem out of your packet has been taken away. But it is expected and it is considerate to let people know as soon as you can that your simultaneous submission has been taken. If you do not, and if another journal wants to accept that same work and you go, oh no, sorry, it's been taken elsewhere, that's a mark against you. That's gonna give you kind of a black eye a little bit. No one's going to like that, and they remember that kind of thing. It sours them a little bit because they got hopeful to be able to publish your work, but dadgummit, it got taken elsewhere, right? So do make sure that you're keeping track of where you send your things. I have an entire spreadsheet of where I send all of my works, and I keep it printed out and I keep it in the same place. And every time I submit something, I write down the title of each one of my poems or my story or whatever it is. I write down the title of the work that I'm submitting. I write down where I submit it to, how I submitted it. So that way you know if it's on paper or if it was an online submission. If it was an online submission, was it by email? Was it by Submittable? Or was it by a different online platform? These things matter because if it's not in Submittable, it's not going to be in Submittable when you go 5 months later to try and look and see what the reply is, right? So keep track of how you're submitting everything. You will lose your work if you don't. You may think that you will remember, you won't, right? The name of the game is kind of send it off and forget about it, because if you remember it, you will be checking every day to see what the status of your submission is. And we can't be doing that because it pulls your heartstrings entirely too much. But do make sure that you know where things are going. I also like to keep the reading period, write down what the reading period is for that particular journal. And I write down the date I submitted it and the date I hear a reply. So I had a submission sit at a quarterly journal. So they publish 4 times a year. That submission sat for over 18 months without hearing one way or another. I wrote to the editor 3 times, very cordially, the first time after 8 months, and they had a 4-month reading period to figure out, hey, what is this? No one got back to me. And after 18 months, I pulled it because that's not how we do this. You need to have a little bit of respect for your work. And if you're going to have that kind of thing happen, you just, yeah, that was a frustrating experience, but that is not the norm. That happens once in a blue moon. So, okay, Lori says, I was wondering if you or someone else reads a poem of yours on their weekly video reading series and shares it on social media, and you previously submitted to a journal. Would the sharing of it on a video reading series be considered a publication? Thanks. So this has kind of been a difficult thing during COVID era, right? thinking about participating in online readings and such like that, if it were a reading that you were invited to and you read your work out loud and that video that happened to be recorded and cataloged elsewhere, we kind of all have the idea that that's okay to do. However, if someone else reads a poem on the weekly video reading series and shares it on social media, we at that point would probably consider it published, right? That has kind of had its limelight, it's had its spot. If it were to be taken down, if you were to revise it at all, put a different title on it, rework it, then that kind of gets put back into the, okay, we can consider it again, slush pile type deal thing. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, what does it mean to pull your work? So when you pull your work, that's to withdraw. Withdraw is to remove from consideration any work that you may have submitted into a particular journal. So when I pulled my work, I wrote to the journal, and it was via submittable. So I went into submittable and I just clicked the withdraw button. And what that did is that pulled it out of the system and put a label on it so that people on the other end of things can know, even if they go back through and read it, that they do not have permission to publish that anymore. So it kind of cancels it out. It's null and void at that point. Thank you for that question. So these are kind of just like the hiccups that you can run into along the way when it comes to publishing, right? So in keeping up with your work and the reading times, I know how fast a journal may or may not get to me. So I know if I send to Beloit Poetry Journal, which I do pretty frequently, they reject really fast. Which you should never really take as an insult, okay? If you get rejected within like an hour, okay, maybe then. But if it's like 2 or 3 days later or something like that, I don't consider that an insult. I would rather someone reject me quickly than me sitting around for months and months going like, okay, have you guys decided? I don't want people to sit on my work when I could potentially take that work and put it elsewhere to a different journal. If people are really on top of their reading and they're rejecting, then good, let's take it. However, if it's something like, again, in an hour or something like that, I'm going to question, did you read my work? Are we sure about that? And even still at that point, that's kind of like I don't know that I'm going to be sending to them again anytime soon, right? But the good news is that there are so many literary journals. You can push to so many journals, right? The game is wide open and available. On top of that, let's talk about rejection. You're gonna get rejected. If I were to have my reading list here with you and show you how many times I've been rejected, which has been over 104, it's a lot. I got rejected on my birthday this year, guys. I've been rejected on Christmas. It's a lot, right? The thing is you send off to these journals and then you hope that you forget about it, and maybe one day down the pipes you might get an acceptance. I've had a handful of acceptances. This is really awesome. Some of those have even been paid, which is even better. Anytime you can hope to get any kind of money out of creative writing, go for it. You are counted lucky, right? Rejection is going to be your most common experience, okay? You should pretty much send something out and expect it to be rejected to prepare your heart for the eventual rejection, right? And if you do happen to get an acceptance, then you can rejoice and rejoice greatly. I find that's what works best for me, but you do what works best for you, okay? If you want to stay hopeful for every submission, do it, but just, yeah, rejection, it's going to happen, and that's okay. If you're getting rejected, that means that you're out there, you're putting your work out there, you're being vulnerable, and you may get picked up, right? So if you're not getting rejected, you're also not getting accepted either, right? It's a numbers game. Keep putting your work out there. If the rejections come, try it again. I can tell you from experience, because I have rejected hundreds on a couple thousands of people, that the editor's taste may change slightly from day to day, depending on what mood they were in when they read your work. Depending on how their current journal is shaping up, maybe your work just didn't have the right kind of tone to fit in with the other pieces that they've accepted. It may be that they've already reached their limit for particular pieces that they can take, like yours. They might just not have jived with you, right? And readers, journals, editorialship, they turn over. The slush pile readers turn over, especially if it is a university journal, which is made up of undergraduate and graduate student readers. They read the slush pile first, typically, before it even gets up to section editors and then the editors in chief. If the editor in chief were to read every single submission, they would have no time to do anything else. I can tell you, Nell probably gets in 200 just poetry submissions per year. And when you're looking at 5 poems per each submission, it's a lot of poems, guys. It's a lot. So we have teams of editors for a reason. We talk about it with each other. We don't always agree with one another. And so, what one editor may really love and want to publish, the majority of the editors may be like, I don't know, we're not feeling it, right? So just because your work doesn't fit doesn't mean it's bad work. It just means that it didn't hit the note the right way at the right time with the right people on the right day in the right year, right? And that's okay. Not everyone's work is for everyone, but find your people, all right? So make sure that you're casting the net far and wide. Do the simultaneous submissions, but also keep up with your stuff. Um, okay, I feel like I have covered a wide chunk of everything, and like you guys might have some questions. So if you do have questions, you can go ahead, you can unmute, you can drop it in the chat. Let me know.
I have a question, Haley.
Go for it.
Like when you're researching the literary journal that would be the best fit for your work, I mean, like I know that when I've submitted poems in the past that have a specific theme, I make sure to send a poem that fits that theme. But I mean, like, I'm not sure I really know how to do really good research on which journals are the best fit for my work. I don't know.
Right. And that may be something that you can kind of find through the grapevine. So, Javasia was talking about the Cancer Survivor Journal that she edits. So that may be something you can go and find particular groups on Facebook and ask, hey, I've got this kind of work. Who do you think would be open and available to taking this? So it's really about like talking with people, but also if that publication is an online journal, you kind of go through and you click through some of their issues, some of their online content, and you read through what are they publishing and putting out, right? Go through their submission guidelines and see if any of the editors have talked about what in particular they're looking for. So I know I, as an editor, have done a couple of interviews for Nell about what specifically I am looking for. I talk with my readers, my team of readers. Hey, this is what I am looking for in our publication. If you guys are looking for other things, that's okay. I may not like it, but we'll talk about it. And if we come to a consensus, then we'll include it. But you can also look at who is editing what. So if you know of a couple of writers who are writing like how you're writing, look to see if they are editors anywhere, right? Can you send them your work? Can you get feedback on your work? Maybe. Who would they recommend publishing with or to? Do they have collections of poems out? If they do, if you've got people that you feel your work is similar to, go and get those collections, or just go to the bookstore and kind of thumb through the collections and see who they have listed in the acknowledgments for having published their poems. So that's when you start connecting names with publications and then just talking to people, right?
Okay. Well, thank you.
Okay. Yes, please tell us what Nell is. Okay, so Nell is the publication at UAB that is a women's only literary journal. So we publish in poetry, we publish in fiction, and we publish in nonfiction. And we are currently during our open reading period, so you can submit to us if you so choose. Um, and it is named in honor of Nell Harper Lee, so that's where the name comes from. We are Alabama's only women's only literary journal, and we before we were Nell, we were Poem Memoir Story. Before we were Poem Memoir Story, we were Astarte. So it's changed names a couple times under editorialship, but the actual publication has been around for a good long while. Um, our team of editors includes Angela Mitchell. So she is the one who is currently doing our fiction immersive workshop. I am the poetry editor. Emily Krozik is our nonfiction editor, and she is known for the Laughing Lesbian blog. And then our editor in chief is Lauren Goodwin Slaughter. So she is a wonderful poet and writer. She's got a couple of nonfiction pieces out as well that she's written lately. So yeah, if you're interested in sending your work to us, oh, Rachel's got the link down in the chat. Thanks, Rachel. You are more than welcome to send to us. So thank you for that. Any other questions? Um, okay, so let's talk a little bit about format and how do you send your work in, because that can also influence how readers read it as well. So if you're sending in a paper submission, I tend to put my name and email address on every page in the header on the right hand side so that it doesn't kind of get mixed in with the poem itself. But also because people make mistakes, they drop poetry packets, papers go everywhere. Have seen it happen. Um, and you want to make sure that your name is with your poem if it happens to get separated from the cover letter. With that, um, please make sure that you're submitting in your work in either like Times New Roman or Garamond 12-point font. If you're using a weird kind of font, what it does is it messes up how your words will be translated on the page when it comes to like if it's poetry, if you have weird spacing somewhere in one particular font, if we were to change that into our journal's font that we use in our print edition, that spacing is going to change and it's going to be weird and it's going to potentially mess up your poem from what you had originally intended. With that, if you use Times New Roman, you pretty much can't go wrong. That is the standard 12-point font. If you want to do strange and unusual things, you are more than welcome to try. I don't know how it would be received well by typical journals. I get a little bit frustrated when I'm trying to read if I have to struggle with the font itself. And that can kind of work against you a little bit, right? I tend to prefer having one poem printed per page and not really on the back side of the page as well. That just comes from like our production process and later on how we're making sure that we're keeping track of the poems. I know it seems like a waste of paper, but the paper industry is a sustainable industry at this point. So basically for the amount of trees that they're taking to turn into paper, they are also planting the trees to make sure that they can harvest in the future as well. So using paper for your submission is going to be okay. If you would like that submission back, you can indicate that in your cover letter. That way you can take it and you can send it out somewhere else as well, right? So if you would like to recycle those and have them sent back to you, you can. If you just want to put a note on there for the readers to recycle them themselves and make sure that they wind up, which we do, going back to the recycling bin, that's great as well. So just indicate what we should do with your submission once we're done with it, which is helpful information to put in the cover letter, right? As far as your digital submissions, it's great if you don't put it in PDF formatting. Not many places want PDFs of the work itself because eventually we will need a Word copy of your work. So Word is what we all typically use, and unless otherwise requested, okay, it's going to want to be into Word. That way we know that it's just compatible with our systems. For PDFs, sometimes when we open them up, it can be iffy. Okay, so Word, 12-point font, Times New Roman, those are all good things. Making sure that your phone number and address are on at least one page of your submission is helpful as well. Okay. Is it appropriate to claim publication credits for writing contest pieces that get published or responses to requests for submission to online journals? Publication credit for writing contest pieces. Yeah, so writing contest pieces, absolutely. So if you want to say, like in your bio, so and so is the winner of the such and such award. Yeah, go for it. Absolutely. Or responses to requests for submissions to online journals. So as if someone were coming to you soliciting a piece, we tend not to put solicitations on there because solicitations are only asking to see your work. They're not guarantee of publication of your work. But if you do have a publication that is forthcoming somewhere, you can put that in your bio. So if it's not out yet, you can definitely say, like so-and-so has work forthcoming in blank. And that's how we would word that. When we're talking about your bios are typically going to be 150 words or shorter. Sometimes they only want 50 words. You really have to look at kind of what that's going to look like. So personally, if you make sure that you have your bio set up 50-word bio, 150-word bio, and keep those to the side in a document for you to pull from so that you don't have to keep rewriting a bio every single time, that's helpful. Okay, what is a bio supposed to look like? Okay, they're typically written in the third person. They start off with your name, first, last, whatever your writing name is. Okay, so I publish under HM Cotton, so H.M. Cotton. This is for a couple of reasons. One, the spelling of my first name is unusual. It's like Valley with an H, but it is not said Halley. And I don't want people to call me Halley. So I don't want them to try and stumble over my first name. It does not need to be a stumbling block for them. My grandfather called me HM all the time. So my middle name's Murray, Haley Murray. It works. I'll roll with it. HM Cotton. It sounds very writerly. So that has what I have started publishing with, and it is what I will continue to publish with. If I were to mix it up, suddenly you've got HM Cotton and Halley Cotton, and now was that even me to begin with? Will the publishing world even know that? We don't know. So decide what you wish to be called. If you want to include a middle initial, let's keep that middle initial in there. If you decide you want to drop the middle initial, suddenly who are you? And are you a different person from someone else? Oh, okay. So you start with your name, and then typically you talk about the place where you earned your last degree, if you got your degree. So for me, I received my master's in creative writing at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. You can do that, or you can talk about where you work. So-and-so works at such and such. So Haley, HM Cotton teaches English and composition at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. I would then list the literary magazines that I am editor on. So I would talk about Nell, I would talk about BPR. Then I would list 3 to 4 places that I have been published. If you have been published in a lot of places, please do not list all of those places. All of us will get very tired reading through that list. Choose like 3 or 4. All right, the places that you feel represent you the best. Okay, usually the most prestigious places you've been published in, or the most recent places that you've been published in. So if you have a lot of places, you can say so and so's been recently published in blank blank blank, right? If you're doing a longer bio for an event or something like that, you can list more places that you've been published in if you feel like those places represent a different part of you. So maybe you have some poetry works in one particular journal, but then you've got some nonfiction essays or something that's been published by like the New Yorker or the New York Times or something like that. Those would be completely different kinds of publications that represent who you are as a writer, um, as a whole. But for the purposes of your literary journals, let's just keep it brief. And then we typically close out the bio with a fun or interesting fact or something about you that you want people to know. This is not a requirement. It just makes it fun for reading the bio and it makes you a little bit human. So for me, I am an avid outdoors enthusiast. I love to go kayaking. So when I am not reading, writing, or teaching, I am usually found in the woods or somewhere on the Cahaba, right? That would be akin to my personal statement that I would have in my bio. So we talk about professional work, we talk about publications, and then we talk about like a fun little tidbit. What do you do outside of writing? Some people talk about their pets, which is absolutely valid and lovely. Some people talk about their family. Some people talk about where they live. Um, that's the chance for you to kind of slip in. Okay, who am I? Who am I really? Who? What do the people want to know? Um, so that is just a helpful outline for how to create a bio. Again, the bio is all up to you. That's sort of industry standard. If you want to break industry standard, I'm not one to tell you to not to. Okay, go for it if you want to go for it. That's usually just what I see people kind of fall back on as the safe option. Okay. Um, Questions about any of that? Are you feeling pretty confident or pretty lost? It's a lot to handle, isn't it? Okay. We've talked about print versus online. We've talked about how to find literary journals. We've talked about formatting. We've talked about the bio. We've talked a little bit about the cover letter. So, cover letter, dear editors, talking about listing off which poems you or the title of the work that you're submitting. It may not be poetry, it might be a short story. So, listing off that, letting them know whether it's a simultaneous submission or not, and assuring them that if it is a simultaneous submission, you will let them know immediately. Uh, and then I typically thank people for their time. And then I'll list my bio. I'll go ahead and just put it on there. So typically the 150-word bio. And then I just sign it off sincerely and make sure that my phone number, my email address, and my mailing address are all listed on there. Um, okay. Uh, what about follow up? How long do you wait to hear? Okay, so usually each journal will let you know what their response time is. Okay, so if it is a 5 month response time and it has been 5 months that go by, I give them 6 months before I kind of creep in and go, hi, hello. If you want to do this and you don't want to sound like a terrible human, because it can be a little bit anxiety inducing to do something like this, you just find the editor of the magazine, usually their email address, or sometimes you can do it directly through Submittable, right? A lot of times on their submission page, they talk about inquiries or submission status, right? And that's what you would be asking for. So you would just write to the editor, hello, I am just checking to see the submission status on my submission, list the name of the poems, and then list, if you can, when you submitted them, and then just thank them for their work again and just sign your name. It does not have to be a big long drawn out explanation, and we'd rather that you not do that, because this is very much of a common occurrence that can happen. Submissions do occasionally get lost or they get mislabeled, or you never know, A, what happens with technology, and B, if it got lost in the mail somewhere, right? You'd really hate to be sitting and waiting on a submission in the mail that got just disappeared. Um, So it is professional, and it is okay to, after a certain amount of time, inquire to your submission status. If they do not have their response time listed, you can go and you can Google usually what their response time is. If you cannot find it after that, look at what kind of journal it is. Do they publish yearly? What was their reading period? If their reading period closed at a certain time for a yearly journal, right? So like BPR closes in March, I think. So if after March, April, if after like May 1st you were not to hear from us, at that point you could be like, hi, haven't heard from you guys. How's the submission going? Um, Give them until at least the end of the reading period and then a little bit more. If it is a quarterly journal, right? So if they publish every 3 months and they don't have their reading period time listed, I would give them probably 2 reading periods. So it may have come in at a weird time on the first reading period. Give them at least one full reading period's worth of time to take it in. Okay. If at that point you haven't got a response back, then you can sort of send in an inquiry. What if I say, Lori Lassell Hamilton is a breast cancer and rape survivor in my bio? Does that hurt my chances? If I feel it's relevant to the poems I am submitting, I usually mention that. But I was wondering, is mentioning that unprofessional? Should I stop mentioning that in my bio? If it is relevant to the work itself or to the place of which you are submitting it. Beyond that, why exactly would be your chance of stating that is what I would ask you, to be able to consider why are you wanting to let people know about that necessarily, but also like that is your experience. So maybe you are trying to say something in particular about the space that you're taking up with this writing, which would absolutely have value. Maybe you are trying to claim that space for other people who have been abused, right? For other people who have had that experience with cancer. It's your experience. Roll with it. I would not turn down or think poorly of anyone who had that in their bio. I tend not to read bios before I read the work. I tend to read the work first and then the bio. So again, you cannot, as an editor, erase all of your bias. You're still going to have some bias, and I can't speak for all editors, but we do try to maintain the idea of the integrity of the work itself and not being put off by anything we kind of feel like a knee-jerk reaction in us, if that does inspire a knee-jerk reaction. If it's important enough to you to put in your bio, put it in your bio. Okay. All right. Great. So we've talked about follow-up, talked about bio. Y'all have more questions that have arisen? Another thing that I want to share with you guys. Yes, Rachel, did you have?
I had a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I'm a student still, so I usually submit on winter break and, in between summer break.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard people say like they take one day a month to submit, or do you have how do you do it?
Submitting takes everything out of you.
Much work.
It's so much work. It takes a lot. I usually sit about once every 4 months or so, usually once every 6 months, and just do a mass submission to everyone. And that winds up being about 8 to 10 submissions usually, which will take 4 hours or more to do that, to narrow down the places that you want to send to narrow down the poems that you're going to send, to get everything shaped up and set. Like, it's exhausting, guys. The thing is you always want to have skin in the game. You always want to make sure that you have work out there. some journals do have bio guidelines on their submission page. So they do ask for that, or they ask them to structure it in a certain way, or they ask for a certain number of words, which is why you kind of got to be ready with a variety of bios, both lengthwise and topic wise, just so that you can plug and play, so that when you do get to those moments of submission, it wears you out just a little bit less. So I find if I were to only submit once or twice here or there, it drags it all out. I have to set aside a moment of time and be like, no, you're going to do this. And then I forget about it for 6 months, and then the rejections slowly roll in, and I'm like, there's that one. There's that one. Okie dokie. It's really unnerving to pull the trigger on the submit button. Yes, it is, which is also why I want to give to you guys this resource right here. This is the Birmingham Arts Journal. The lovely bit about the Birmingham Arts Journal is that they publish pretty frequently, which means there is a high volume of work that you can submit. They're usually always open for a reading period. They're local to Birmingham, even though like anyone from anywhere can submit to them. It feels good to be in a local journal. It has a relatively low ceiling to break through, as far as if you keep submitting to them, eventually you'll get something taken. They are a lovely journal. They are multimedia, so they also do publish like photography and artwork as well, if that's something that you're into. They take poetry, they take story, they take nonfiction. It's a lovely publication. It's wonderful to see your name in print, to have something in your hands. I have been in the Birmingham Arts Journal, and so have many of my friends. So many of us, when we're first starting out, get our first breakthrough in the Birmingham Arts Journal. It's such a welcoming journal. It's got sort of like a great atmosphere surrounding it, encouraging. It's not a discouraging journal to send to. If you need to feel good about yourself, it's great. And it's good work, and it's good to see your friends in print. And they always have a reader's release reception where people can go and they can read their work that they've been published there. And it's nice. It's nice to have that formality around getting published and having your name to something. Do these publications give feedback? Most publications do not give feedback. It already takes so much time to read work that to give feedback on work specifically is a lot of extra time. Some places do give feedback, and that is rare, and that is a gem. They will usually mention whether or not they will give feedback in their submission stuff. And that's nice. It's nice to get feedback. Occasionally you can request feedback, and that is helpful, but don't get your feelings hurt if the answer is no, because again, a lot of literary journals have just a surplus of work coming in that is hard enough to keep up with reading, let alone critiquing. That being said, if you get a reading group together of friends who publish with you, who are working with you, and you get feedback from one another, it's good to have your sort of writing group to buoy you up, so that when, and this is what I want to share with you guys, when you get published, tell people. Don't be embarrassed. You don't have to play it humble. It's exciting for you. It's exciting for the people around you. Share the links, tell your people, let people brag on you, make a big deal about it, because it is a big deal. Okay. Share the work. There is the Birmingham area writers Facebook page, group, whatever. Go join it. If you want to share your work that you've been published or whatever, go drop a link to where you've been published. Go share your wins. Writing can be so isolating, and we get so much rejection when it comes to this kind of publishing, that when you get a win, share your wins. Okay. The thing about the writing world is you can have those people who are jealous and want to see you fail because they're not winning and you're winning. And that is one kind of mentality that creeps up. And we're not here for that. We're not here to lift that up. We're here to lift up each other. Because if you have people winning around you, that's good. If you have people winning in your community, eventually your wins are going to come. Okay. If you're surrounding yourself with people who are trying, who are writing, who are encouraging, who are hustling, you surround yourself with the good people, with the people who care, with the people who, when your time to win comes, they look at you and they say, yes, we knew that you could do it. Look at you, right? Not people who, when you publish, they go, I mean, it's okay. It could have been better. It would have been better in this other journal. Or, yeah, I got published last week and that's great. Okay, no, right? Be careful who you're letting in your writing circles. Encourage other people, lift other people up, read their works. We're talking be enthusiastic for people, okay? So that people will also be enthusiastic for you. If you feel that little bit of jealousy creeping up, I mean, it's natural to feel jealous. It's natural to want to win for yourself. But don't let that interfere with how you're reacting to your friends' wins. Okay? You're only ever in competition with yourself. You are not in competition for space with these other writers. There's so much space to be published in. There's so much work that can be put out there and accepted and read by the world. Don't feel like you're being held down or held back by your friends and your people who are winning currently. Yeah, okay? So let that be known that if you do win, share that win. We want to see you winning. We want to cheer you on, okay? That's the good part of it all. We go through all of this difficult part of writing the work, sweating over the work, editing it, spending the time sending it off, waiting for the rejections, getting those, crying about them, questioning whether or not you really want to be a writer, sending them off again. And then the acceptance is the shiny bit. It's the exciting bit, right? Even if it's a silly spec flash fiction. Yes. And it's not silly. It's awesome. If it's making people happy, if it makes you happy, then that has meaning. Okay? Too many people are trying to make sure that all of the writing is serious and going to affect the world. You know what? It's okay to be silly. It's okay to laugh. It's okay to play. It's okay for things not to be perfect, all right? The writing is never done. The writing is never perfect. It only gets to that point where it's shareable, right? It only gets to the point where you're like, okay, I'd like to share this with others. And you're going to send it off and it's going to be published and you're going to look at it and be like, I wish I had done such and such, or I wish I did so and so. You know what? Whatever. It's existing in that current form. And if you want to edit it later on and include it in your own anthology of work later, changed, you're allowed to do that, right? It's okay. But I want you guys to be proud of your work. Your work deserves to be shared. It deserves to be enjoyed by other people. And I want to encourage you to put it out there. Yes, the rejections are going to come. They will hurt. But also the acceptances will come too. And they will feel so euphoric. Right? Let us cheer for you. Share that with us. Okay. Any other questions before we sort of wrap things up, guys? All right. Cools. Thank you guys for coming out tonight. I appreciate seeing all of you. And if you ever want to talk publishing, if you ever want to kind of like hear my experiences or ask an editor or something like that, or get guidance or whatever, you are more than welcome to contact me and chit chat. We could talk about it. I can encourage you and give you sort of like buoy you up a little bit. That's what I love to do. So thank you guys for coming out. Best of luck in your writing and best of luck in your submitting. Okay. So thanks guys. Bye.